All right, we are now recording. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Social Club at the End of the World. I'm happy to be joined by my brother Adam, my partner and love of my life Melissa, and my brother Miles in Calgary. We'll just say some brief hellos, and then Miles is going to kick it off with his update, and then the rest of us will each give our updates, and we'll take it from there. So, Miles, whenever you're ready, feel free to take it away.
All right, thanks, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here, and I have the pleasure of kicking things off with an update of what I was up to this past weekend. I've mentioned Chief Lee Crowchild a couple of times. Let me begin by acknowledging that I'm on Treaty 7 in the province of Alberta, Canada. The city is Calgary. Its traditional native name is Mohkinstsis. How's my sound? Everything coming through okay? Great. Okay, so Treaty 7 is home to the Niitsitapi, also known as the Blackfoot Confederacy, and Treaty 7 was signed in 1877. So with respect to everything that's going on climate-wise and some of the things that I've read and researched, I was drawn over to the indigenous wisdom somewhere along the line. And I consumed a lot of YouTube videos by traditional knowledge keepers of the indigenous world and the worldview that they have. And I was really struck. At the same time, something for everybody to know that is going on in Canada is in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada produced a very detailed report after thousands and thousands of interviews and research into the mistreatment and the abuses, really genocidal things that have been done to Indigenous people in Canada. And it was very powerful because I didn't realize just how ignorant I was. Well, I'm not going to use the word ignorant because the definition of ignorant is not knowing and not wanting to know. So it's not that I don't want to know. I actually want to learn as much as I can. So to just bring it to a very focal point, the purpose of me going to this meeting on the Tsuut'ina Nation on Saturday, it was a synchronicity of events that has sort of occurred. And I delivered in a ceremonial way a letter, a cover letter, plus, hold them. I delivered to him in a ceremonial fashion a letter, a cover letter, plus what I call an invitation. And at some point, I will be pleased to read the cover letter today. I will keep the invitation confidential.
Should we turn off your phone?
Needs to mic. There we go. So, yeah, there's a cover letter, and I can explain when I read it how I handed it to him, because I think it's important for maybe everybody to learn some of these protocols of their laws, and the invitation, and at this point I'm now waiting. So that's my update, and any questions, or also just wanting to let other people introduce themselves too now. Thank you.
Hey, Miles. Hey, I was noticed that the Indigenous people have the highest teenage suicide rate in all the ethnologies too.
Yeah, yes, that is very true. It is really reprehensible what conditions some of the First Nations live with, and you know, there's a lot of work to be done.
If we can live with this one, I think we should stay. Do you want to turn off your volume on yours?
So yes, there's a lot of truth still to be uncovered, and there's a lot of what I would call the phrase that the First Nations here uses, talking or making wolf, which is a truth-telling and peacemaking process. Still a lot of truth-telling needs to be done. And this truth-telling is all about what Radish is about too, because the truths that have created the mistreatment and abuse of First Nations is what is also responsible for our current ecological emergency. And I'll just note that at this event, people were, it was a mixed group of different religions, faiths, and even trade unions and such. People several times used voiced a concern about climate change, and I corrected them quite emphatically, saying that's an inappropriate phrase. We need to use something like ecological emergency is what we are in.
Gotcha. Thank you, Miles. Thanks, sweetheart. All righty. So no, that was an awesome update. And Adam, would you like to jump in with your update as we go around the circle?
Sure. Well, I've been going over the paperwork that you sent us, and some of us. And I guess the biggest thing I've been thinking about is how RCI how we don't have to use ASI really very much, if at all.
What's ASI, please?
Artificial superintelligence. And I was thinking that we have hundreds of millions of teenagers, school kids, that could help. I mean, because basically we're talking about a bunch of some really sophisticated spreadsheet programs, which doesn't require any, artificial intelligence. I mean, these kids could be our search engines. So instead of going for using artificial intelligence, why don't we take advantage of all these kids and have them? I mean, it's their future that we're building anyway. So if they joined in, they could do. I mean, the topic teams, the think tanks that work with the AI, and in some ways, instead of working with the AI, the kids could be the search engines. They could populate the spreadsheets. I mean, there's a whole lot that they could do if we could get them on board. And I think it wouldn't be that hard to get them on board. That's what I've been thinking mainly, and kind of writing to that effect.
Very good. Thank you, Adam. All right. And Sweetie, would you like to give an update?
Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. It's really good to see you again. Jamin and I are just coming back from New York City, where we saw a very incredible art exhibit at the Guggenheim of Helma af Klint's work. I believe she was born in 1908 and was an esoteric artist who followed the work of Rudolf Steiner, Goethe, among others. And interestingly, the work that she has painted, you can look her up online if you're interested, very much connects with the work we're doing here. And it was very interesting to go with my artist perspective and Jamin's more engineered scientific perspective and see that those met in her paintings. So that was really incredible. And she had this vision of she refused to have her work exhibited until 20 years after her death. Or I think she died like 35 or 40 years ago. And her vision was to have her work exhibited in a spiral temple, which is what the Guggenheim is. So that was quite interesting to be part of that. And then being in New York and seeing the sort of incredible culture or lifestyle, exaggerated, many people in a very tight space, again, and seeing this old story being lived out with this consciousness of this new story that we need to create and are, in fact, starting to create now. So that was really exciting. And as we get closer to going back to the Northwest, of course, my heart is being called out to, again, this work for the orca whales. And we have some ideas for how to take the next action steps to helping them survive, because as you know, they're starving to death. So anyway, that's all I have to say right now, and see you later.
Thank you, sweetie. All righty. I see we got Dan and Uncle Frank. Uncle Frank, we can see from your nose up, so you may want to adjust your video camera or screen a little bit there. In the meantime, Dan, would you like to provide an update? It's totally optional, of course. On to you, Dan.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, so I have been, you know, I'm recovering from some relatively minor knee surgery, which I received last Tuesday, so I've been a little bit focused on that. I did watch the YouTube video that Jamin, you and Jamie put out there, and, you know, I made a comment. I thought it was really, really very, very inspiring. You know, it was a pretty good thing to see. And I had noted, you know, I think in my comment that, you know, I had been brooding about the latest post on Arctic News by Malcolm Light, which is, you know, kind of the pretty gloom, doom type outlook. Again, underlining you know, the fact that these positive feedback loops, particularly centered in the Arctic, are you know, they're exponential, and that you know, time is of the essence. And I did really appreciate that the person, I don't know whether it was the vicar, who it was that you were speaking to at the Cleveland Diocese, but I thought that, you know, I think it was Jamie said, you know, he could see the light bulb go off when he assimilated the nature of the, I think, the methane positive feedback loop that's going on. And I think also, I think it, again, the exponential nature of it is really critical, and is something which a lot of times is just minimized almost, like, oh, you know, exponential, what does that mean? You know, but it means a lot. So, you know, I do hope that, you know, there is some traction. I don't know, you may have already discussed what kind of feedback you've gotten, and I'm just speaking from an ignorant place here, but I hope that there's something that comes of that, and that something definitely needs to be done quickly to raise up the consciousness of the people, because without that, you know, nothing will happen. So, and then the other thing, just locally, you know, we're moving in here in Chicago, we're moving into the election season. You know, I think around February, I think it's February 26th, we have the, you know, here in Chicago, the mayoral, kind of like a primary. You know, it could be anybody who gets enough signatures can run for mayor. That's kind of a, locally, that's a very interesting process that's going on. And also there are aldermanic, in the 50 wards of Chicago, we have these aldermanic races going on too. So I've been pretty much absorbed in, you know, that kind of thing. So anyway, that's what I've been thinking about, and I'm gonna turn it over to somebody else. Thanks.
Very good, very good. All right. Anyone else who would like to provide an update before I provide my update is welcome to do so. Just either raise your hand or start speaking. Jamie and I had a meeting with the Cleveland Catholic Diocese and submitted a very. Oh, by the way, I want to invite people to mute their microphones when they're not talking. So Uncle Frank and Fred, basically, if your name starts with an F, go ahead and mute your microphone if you can. Anyway. Jamin, you went off the air the last minute. Okay, can you guys hear me now? Raise your hand. Okay, you can hear me. Okay, can you hear me pretty clear enough? Okay, great, thanks. I appreciate that heads up, Adam. All right, so I'll start over. So our update is last week, Jamie and I met with the. Oh, by the way, Fred and Uncle Frank, if you guys want to mute your microphones, that would be great. If you don't know how to do that, just
okay. No, I'm trying to.
Oh, yeah. If you just move your mouse on the screen, you'll see a little microphone with a line through it. If you just click on that, it toggles on it. I did. Okay. Oh, there you go. Okay, Fred, you're successful, so that's awesome. Thank you. Again, last week, Jamie and I had a meeting with the leadership of the Cleveland Catholic Diocese and submitted a really detailed proposal to the Catholic Church in beautiful wooden bound binders, leather and wood. I mean, just incredible stuff that Amish artisans here in Northeast Ohio put together for us. And had a 1 hour meeting, a really good meeting. And the long and the short of it is that we are going to get, well, the long and the short of that meeting is the Vicar General was, as was mentioned earlier, his light bulbs really went off. I mean, when we started that meeting, he was basically saying, I can understand that, this is something that's going to affect everyone's, our children's children kind of thing. And of course, we clarified that it was, of course, far more serious than that and far more urgent than that. And that took a bit of explaining. But he really got it. He came up to speed extremely quickly. Both Jamie and I commented that that was pretty much the best example of active listening we had seen, in my case, ever. Extremely good active listening. So he is going to introduce us to some folks within the diocese, and we can start engaging, though he did caution us that the church moves slowly. And we, of course, emphasized the extreme urgency under which we're living with abrupt climate change, destruction of the biosphere, mass extinction threatening our own extinction, possibly in the very near term. And so in addition to being patient and engaging with the Cleveland Catholic Diocese, we have a plan to get a copy of our proposal reliably in the hands of Pope Francis. And after we're done with our round of updates here, I will go more into depth on that overall strategy. But just in a nutshell, I think that all of the very fragmented conversations that we and Guy McPherson and so many other folks who we collectively follow, these fragments are really coming to nothing. And what we need, or, well, that may not be fair. I mean, some of these things take time, but we're out of time. And so it is my conviction that what is urgently needed is for some leader or some group of leaders recognized on the worldwide stage, announce to humanity the graveness of our problem and a plan for moving forward that involves bringing humanity together and using our collective intelligence to come up with or identify or promote whatever set of solutions will give us the best chance at survival. Whatever those odds are, I don't care how slim they are, there's really no other game in town at this point other than pursuing the solutions which maximize the odds of survival of as much of life on Earth as possible. So I'll delve once we're done with updates. And I see your comment there, Alex. Remember when we were saying we need to refreeze the Arctic this winter, 1 month left? Well, the bottom line is we need to refreeze the Arctic ASAP. And if we can do it in a month, great. If we can do it by this summer, great. But we just have to do it ASAP. And I would love to have refrozen the Arctic last summer or this winter. You know, my bottom line point, and I'd love to hand you the microphone if you want to give an update on your perspective. But my point is that no matter how far things have gone and continue to go, there is no other game in town than doing the very best we can with extreme urgency to turn this ship around. And I'll talk more about the strategy that I propose, which is to get a group of leaders, in this case, religious leaders. That's what we've been focusing on recently, and I'll talk more about that. But get a group of religious leaders recognized at the worldwide level, like Pope Francis, to appeal directly to all of humanity through an intensive media, PR campaign, world tour, all the above, to begin to convene a collective intelligence of a critical mass of several million of us, for starters, to begin to work on this in a serious way, and that the world can see that we are working on this. And then individuals at that point will have a choice. Do I jump in and help, or do I sit on the sidelines and, you know, throw rotten produce at the people who are trying to save my life? Anyway, update, looking forward to getting more into those. Does anyone else want to give an update at this point? Feel free to unmute and just speak up if you haven't given an update yet and you'd like to. No pressure. Speaking is always optional here at the Social Club at the End of the World. All right. Well, in the absence of any more personal updates, the single most important agenda item in my mind, and what I go to bed thinking about every night and wake up thinking about every morning, is how do we get this started? How do we get the critical mass of humanity convened, age that everyone knows that, yes, this is the group that is actually working on this. And as I mentioned, I'd love to see a critical mass of several million of us, for starters. And I think it's going to take world leaders with credibility. Francis, you know, Prince Charles, soon to be King of England, the head of the Church of England, and other religious leaders. The hypothesis that we're working on, and the proposal that we're working on, is that by organizing such a leadership team of world leaders of major, not just, you know, religions, but really any, let's just say, practice, so that it's really a catch-all, that world leaders come together and agree to lead humanity in developing a collective intelligence, which can be done very, very quickly, so that we begin this intense search for and development of solutions to with tremendous urgency, cool Mother Earth through geoshading, refreezing the Arctic, and other means, and gradually from there expand into other realms, whether it's holistic land management for restoring ecosystems and sequestering carbon, cleaning up the oceans, caring for the poor, for migrants, for people in extreme poverty, et cetera, et cetera. We've got a lot of problems to solve. But at the top of the list is cooling the planet, because we are in a runaway overheating. And I'll continue talking, but feel free to cue yourself up to jump in. Let's end civilization is a comment that Alex just posted. You know, the problem I see with that, with ending civilization, and Dan's up in the queue, so I'll hand it to you in a moment, Dan. But the problem I see with just ending civilization, the immediate problem with that is we lose global dimming, right? And that could, you know, create an immediate spike of, I don't know, somewhere between 1 to 3 degrees centigrade. Alex, I recognize, as you're saying, it is a heat engine, civilization. There's absolutely no question about that, but it can become, civilization can become, if we redirect it and re-engineer it and transform it, it can become an engine for healing Mother Earth, for cooling the planet, restoring ecosystems, etc. So anyway, I invite you to join the queue. And then actually voice your thoughts. Dan is next up in the queue. So Dan, please take it away. And then anyone else who would like to be in the queue to speak, please put yourself in the queue. And if you don't know how, just raise your hand and get my attention. Take it away, Dan. Thank you.
Okay. So here are my thoughts on the overall situation. I think that anybody who has knowledge of the reality that there's a high probability, whether you time it, that it's going to happen perhaps in just the immediate future, you know, or you have maybe a couple of decades, whatever the time frame is. If you have knowledge that the planet is going to heat up to 3, 4, 5, 6 degrees centigrade average global temperature, then there is no time to waste. And it also seems that if people understand at this point that the kind of reforms that have been talked about for decades, you know, yes, we do need to go over from a fossil fuel industrial economy to other forms of, you know, renewable energy, and we need to deindustrialize in a careful way. All of these things need to be done, but we do not have a lot of time. And we also, you know, kind of have to understand that, and I felt this way for a long time, that, you know, people, I find myself, you know, personally, a lot of people who are in my life, they don't really want to hear this stuff. And they give me the boundary, you know, they say, I don't want to hear it, you know, I don't want to hear it. I've already heard it. I don't want to think about it. I want to, you know, do some things, you know, I want to enjoy life, whatever. You know, there's problems that I have to contend with day to day. They don't want to hear it. But by not hearing it and by not being able to assimilate what is really going on, and again, I stress the exponential nature of these positive feedback loops, particularly in the Arctic area, you know, and apparently maybe, you know, in some of the things going on in the ocean. If you don't grasp that and understand what we're up against, you're never going to have, we can't have the socio-political pressure that will force these kind of changes to take place in a relatively brief period of time. And you know, I do, you know, I've said on the Social Club numerous times, you know, I listen to media that's on sort of the alt-right Trump side of things. I listen to CNN, I listen to Fox News, I listen to MSNBC at times, although I find that one kind of hard to listen to. But the point is, all of these media that most of the population in the United States tunes into completely ignore what is going on. And it's now being incorporated into narratives which are very problematic. For example, you know, a common one is, well, you know, the alarmism about the climate is something, you know, on the alt-right side of things that is being propagated in order to impose a totalitarian world order run by the elites around the world. And the elites themselves, you know, appear to have a thought process and a narrative that, yeah, you know, maybe at this point in time, not because they're, you know, talking about abrupt climate change, etc., but just simply, you know, democracy isn't really workable. We have to make changes. The people are ignorant, thanks to, in part, because we keep them ignorant through the media. But we do need to, you know, just kind of take over this narrative of, you know, whether it's put as the, you know, the people, democracy versus, you know, globalist elitism, you know, sort of what you see going on in France today with the yellow vests and those protests. They know, you know, certain things, but again, they do not understand what the larger context of the climate problem is. And once that becomes incorporated into narratives that talking about the climate is just, oh, you know, that's just propaganda BS in order to, you know, in these power contests that are going on. This is a very negative thing. And I do think, again, if Pope Francis and other religious leaders and, you know, you know, people who have the power to get a message out very, very quickly, this would be a positive thing. One final thing, though, even if that were to happen, one of the things that is probably going to meet some resistance is that what are the consequences of the message getting out? You know, people who really kind of understand on some level, even if they're not, you know, in Guy McPherson's corner in terms of time, but they do get it that, you know, we're looking at extinction sooner or later. But the problem is, you know, if the general population hears the message that, you know what, got it. If you know what, the, you know, fossil fuel corporations have on purpose, they've always understood, they're scientists, they're very good scientists, they pay money to. They've understood what was happening and what was coming, and they have, for short-term economic gain, they have simply used all sorts of pretty tried and true propagandistic techniques to sow doubt about what was happening. And then, you know, all people involved in that process, including the politicians who've taken the money, and they are probably by and large pretty ignorant about things because most of them are lawyers who do not have extensive education in areas that are necessary. But all of these individuals have to, you know, be afraid that there's going to be tremendous vengeance taken against them, their families, their money, all of it. And that's one thing that I think gets in the way. And okay, so there, I'll turn it over to somebody else. Thanks.
So up is Melissa, followed by Miles, followed by Adam, followed by Jamin. And to queue yourself up, just type your name in, or if you can't do that, just get my attention and I'll put you in the queue. Melissa, did you want to talk onto here or your own computer? Okay. And I just want to make a comment since the question came up. So we have a soft 5-minute rule. If you're talking, if you see me hold up 4 fingers, that means you've gone for 4 minutes. If you see me hold up 5, it doesn't mean stop. It just means you're at the 5-minute soft limit. And so, okay, Melissa is up next. Take it away, sweetie.
Hi again, everyone. My thoughts are inspired by AJ's comments, which were correct to my knowledge. He's talking about humanity being a heat engine, that we kill numerous species every day without thinking about it, and that all civilizations from the past have collapsed at some point. One of the things I've read recently that really has resonated with me is that part of the issue today with this Homo sapiens sapien civilization, as we call ourselves now, is that because we no longer live from the laws of the universe, which are very specific, and most of us don't even know what those are any longer, but we see it in action in nature every day, but don't understand that still, is that we have disrupted the natural evolution or development of our own species. And because we think that we have dominion over the earth and that the universe was created for mankind, that includes women as well, of course, that creation then stops with man. And so it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if creation stops with man, then it's stopping, because it actually wasn't created for us. Creation is creation, and we are part of creation. Also to note is that the human environment and the natural environment deteriorate together. That all of living creatures are dependent upon one another and connected to one another. That we are inseparable. We seem to think that we can substitute an irreplaceable and irretrievable beauty with something that we create ourselves, which is not correct. So I'm really interested in inspiring people in my personal artistic creative way to really start imagining and being creative again to create this new story where we don't live separately from the natural laws. We slow down. And I'm encouraging people, even in the face of this huge crisis on the earth, that we can enact in small ways things that do make a difference, whether we survive in the long run or not. So even if it's saving the life of some butterflies or planting indigenous plants that will help encourage animals. Jamin and I went in and visited a very small bird wildlife sanctuary in New York City. There's a small group of people people bring them migratory birds that have been hurt. So there was this huge swan in there who had lead poisoning. There were Canadian geese. There was a woman practicing Reiki on a pigeon. It was really endearing. And I believe that even these very small acts and gestures of kindness are very important. And I encourage all of us to participate in that dance. Thank you.
Thank you, sweetie. All right, up next is Miles, followed by Adam, followed by Jamin. Take it away, Miles.
Thank you, Jamin. I will even use my own little clock here. To begin with, I'd just like to follow up on what Melissa said, she hopes to inspire people. And social club at the end of the world has inspired me very much. And I think when yes, thank you, everybody. I think back when I first cautiously or with a lot of trepidation thought I'd join into this hangout, I was very unsettled about it. I was very unsettled about the title, Social Club at the End of the World. Just to even express or share the title of the Social Club at the End of the World was troublesome to me. But in this very short period, the world is really waking up since you launched. And I have no hesitation now saying I'm participating in the Social Club at the End of the World. So that's how much things are dynamically changing, in my opinion. One of the attributes about not only the creativity that you've inspired in me, such as performance art, you know, you're going out in your Darth Vader outfit, singing your heart out in the middle of traffic. You know, it's like, wow, like I would never do that. My background is also civil engineering. And, you know, I'm more of a straight-laced kind of guy, but I'm coming into more of an artistic aspect of me that has been repressed, I suppose. The other benefit of this social club, talking with respect to the time limits that we have, they're much more generous than any of the other venues that I've been at. So I was at this 3-hour meeting of all these various religious groups and organizations. And essentially all I had as an opportunity was to ask a couple of questions of the chief, which I'm very blessed and honored to have really those opportunities. But when it came to sharing with the group, when Chief Lee Crowchild, Zach Gigi Crowchild was finished, and it was then now to interact among ourselves, it was essentially all you could do is talk in sound bites. And that is at the root cause of why we're in our situation today, in my opinion, because there's very little opportunity. Our society has been misshapen to the point where we're not even talking to each other. Now, that's where the indigenous wisdom is so profoundly different. They will talk around in that circle of theirs, like we're kind of in a circle here too, for as long as it takes to get to consensus. That's missing in what Joanna Macy and Molly Brown in this book describe as the industrial, it's the industrial consuming society. She, instead of saying capitalism, the industrial growth society is what she uses, because it's not just Western capitalism like we have in Canada and the United States, but equally at fault has been the Soviet Union or China with their command and control capitalism. They're both capitalisms, and they're both consuming the planet like the indigenous people, Sherry Mitchell, in her Sacred Instructions, describes as the cannibal giants. Thank you, I got 4 minutes. So I'm at the 4-minute mark. So just to share before I wrap up, I'm continuing with the performance art, because I went to City Hall a couple of weeks ago with this sign, and I could sit there for a little while and nobody gave me too much problem, but then finally security guards came over and said I had to take my sign down. I went to the library with the same sign, and they also said, sorry, after a few minutes, some 5 minutes or so, you have to take your sign down. And I said, well, I'm trying to connect with people. I'm trying to engage face-to-face with people. How do you propose that I reach out to people if you want to talk about something serious in a face-to-face fashion? And the supervisor was stumped. He said, well, I'll use social media. Well, okay, I've got some concerns about social media. So anyway, I'm still continuing, and I can share more of this, but another piece of performance art. I have this briefcase. It's very reminiscent of what the President of the United States is followed by, the so-called nuclear football with the codes. And I'm describing this briefcase as the thesis, and the president's briefcase is the antithesis. This is loaded with all the books and materials in my iPad. I'm saying that I have the keys to dismantling the atomic weapons as opposed to launching them. And I'm going to walk around Calgary with that. Thank you.
That is beautiful. Miles, thank you for that. So next up in the queue is Adam, followed by Jamin, followed by Dan. And I just want to comment that, if what you have to say takes more than 5 minutes, you can, break it up into a couple of chunks. And after you've spoken, just put yourself back into the queue as Dan has just done, and as I will do myself in a moment here. So take it away. And also in between speaking, if you don't know how to add yourself to the queue, just wave your arms or just speak up like now in moments like this, and get yourself into the queue. All right, take it away, Adam. Thank you.
No, thanks, Jamin. So you asked, how do we get started? And I think that you're on the right course with the Catholic Church. It's a good course to go. You get a lot of people there. And then you also said that we have to let that people need to find out. We need to tell them. So you can't tell people, is what I made a comment here. You can't tell people without having a plan at the same time, because there'll just be mass panic will ensue. So if you have a plan for a way out when you tell them, then they have some place to go. So I think it's really critically important, because the only plan that I see out there, other than my Road to Life plan, is the plan for RCI to get developed. And, so I think if that website gets developed and people have a place to go, and then they won't be inclined to panic so much. So that's the main point that I wanted to make. I'll just drop off there. Thanks.
Sure. And Adam, that's great modeling of brevity. We don't have to take all 5 minutes. That's just kind of, so thank you for that. All right. So I'm going to iterate or reiterate what I think is our central challenge at this point. And that is that we create and convene what I will call a global campfire. Basically, this kind of, all of us are here together, listening to each other, commenting, sharing. But of course, with millions of people or hundreds of millions participating, we break it up into different topic groups or different, video conference rooms on different topics. And the, which is completely technically feasible right now. That's what, I think in 30 days, the tech sector is properly activated, and more on that in a bit. But in 30 days, we could build out the platform that we need, that we've been talking about. We'd have millions of conversations going on in parallel. You can jump from conversation to conversation, make your contribution, and move on to some other room where you can make yet another contribution, or be one of the anchors of a given conversation and just stay there. Whatever you want to do, it's totally left up to the individual. But supported by artificial intelligence, we would be able to find all of those conversations that where we can make our best contributions and contribute. Because, if you just think about it, with humanity operating in the current modality that we've been in for, 10,000 years or so, sure, we've got the steady increase in technological capability, but we've been fundamentally living in the same modality, which is I'll just call the modality of separation, and that is the modality where we don't have this global campfire where we can all connect with each other and co-create solutions for the common good. We simply don't have that. I mean, we've got things like the United Nations, but without going too deep into that, I mean, that's just national governments, which of course have their own specific interests, their own degrees of corruption, their own degrees of embeddedness with the private sector and the military-industrial complex, and so on and so on. But what I'm saying is, even if you consider the United Nations and Facebook, and we do not. Facebook probably comes the closest to a planetary forum of that nature, but it's certainly not directed towards any goal of saving life on Earth or anything of that nature. It's a money-making machine for the owners of Facebook. So we urgently need to convene this global campfire. In fact, in the face of the ongoing and building and accelerating catastrophe that we're in the midst of, it is frankly mind-boggling that it has not been convened yet. Doesn't that kind of blow your mind? That, we're all still just so fragmented, in our own little circles at cafes and corporations and churches and mosques and synagogues. We're just in these little tiny huddles, right? But there is no planetary forum. There are illusions of planetary forum in the mass media, in Facebook, in Twitter, but there is no planetary forum that is specifically designed and organized to get us out of the mess that we're in. It's like a city without a fire department, thousands of fires burning all over the city, but no fire chief, no fire stations, no fire trucks, no organization. What do we expect? So, four fingers to myself, and that is why we are appealing to religious leaders to convene this planetary forum. So I'd like to kind of get down to basics and, look, if somebody has a better idea as to how we can solve our problems absent a planetary forum, just say so, right? If I'm on the wrong track here, somebody tell me why so I can drop this and, join the other track. I'm being totally serious here. But if I am on the right track, please join me and say, yes, Jamin, we agree. We need a planetary forum. You're not crazy, right? And then we can see how we go about building one. You see what I'm saying? Because if we just spend our time either diagnosing the problem or, pointing the finger here, there, and everywhere, that doesn't get us closer to building a planetary forum, which is about unity, about bringing us together. All right, I'm coming on 5 minutes. I've got more to say, but I'm going to pass it off to the next person. Next up in the queue is Dan, followed by Miles, and that's all in the queue right now. So go ahead and take it away, Dan, and thank you all.
Yeah, thanks. Just finishing off my thoughts that I was expressing earlier. Maybe, again, I would love it if Pope Francis and, Prince Charles and, the others' leadership would demand that the public, the politicians, the corporate hierarchies address the real issues. But one of the things, I've often talked about the problems with the organized religions and the some of the beliefs and what the consequences of that are. and maybe that kind of thing won't really get in the way. I do want to, but a couple of other thoughts for you guys. In terms of community and people being able to work together, I know in my own life and the times when I've been actually able to work with people, in advocacy issues, and we actually work together on a regular basis. These were some of the most satisfying times in my life. I even remember when I was in graduate school in psychology, and I was living in a married student housing kind of very, very nice sort of rural area. And everybody living there was a graduate student in something. I was a graduate student in psychology, and most people had little kids, so we would get together on the basis of just being a bunch of families, all of us in graduate school. But we started working on some issues which were directed against the university administration, and we would meet. Maybe this night we'd meet over at Jim's house, and the other night over at Bill's, etc. And we'd get together and talk about what we were doing, and then we'd see one another constantly because we're all living kind of in the same area. And there was a sense of, I guess I have to say, kind of an equality. The status differences weren't really playing in there. We were all graduate students, in different areas. And it made for, kind of very effective interaction. So that's just one thing and today, I mean, the alienation, I live in a condominium building in Chicago, and what I find is, it's a very nice building. The people who live in this place are really, generally speaking, really nice folks. But and some of them do get together. But a lot of times it'll be like I'll be in the elevator, and I'll see somebody I haven't seen for maybe over a year, and I'll say, "Hey, good to see you." In this building, you never know whether somebody's passed away or moved away, etc. It's just there's this alienation even among neighbors that live closely together, and part of it is because, I don't want to get too involved with these people because who knows what that's going to result in, etc. Kind of a thing. But and then. One other thing I want to kind of talk. Yeah, just one final thing. I was reading a book by this woman. I hope I get her name right. I think it's Arundhati Roy. She's an Indian woman, and she recently, I think it was a relatively recent book, that she came out on the problems with Hinduism in India today, and kind of the theme of the book, she was talking about this sort of dialogue that was going back in the 1930s between Gandhi and this other person whose name I can't recall right now, and she was pointing out how Gandhi, very famous for a lot of positive things, but he also signed on pretty much to the caste system in India and actually felt it was a good idea. But reading this book where she starts talking about the brutality that is still going on today, I'll finish up right in the caste system in India today, which is again supposedly a democracy of some sort, but it's very much controlled by the Hindus, religious people, and just reading it and thinking to myself, wow, I sort of maybe knew some of this was going on, but reading about it, taking it in, assimilating what it actually is and why it's happening, it really hit me. It really moved me emotionally. the reality of it. And I do think that's what's necessary in terms of this climate change, this exponential situation. What does it mean? You know, it's kind of like, we're generally speaking in the United States, nobody is yet really feeling the consequences of it in a way that they can say, wow, this is being caused by this. Okay, I'm gonna pass it on, but I do think that impact is definitely necessary.
All righty, thank you, Dan. Okay, next up in the queue is Miles, followed by Jamin, followed by Adam, followed by Melissa. So take it away, Miles.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Yes, people, you know, trying to get people to get out of their turtle shells and to start talking to each other is really very important to this. Sheldon Woolen, professor of sociology down there somewhere in the United States, recently passed away, and he said passivity will be civilization's downfall. And when we combine that with what we've talked about in the past, what Einstein said in an article titled Atomic Education Urged by Einstein, the article written in the New York Times on the 25th of May, 1946. Albert Einstein said, quote, "A new type of thinking is essential if mankind is to survive and move toward higher levels." So the only way we're going to get to this new kind of thinking is to get people talking, you know, in a forum like this. Now, you may ask, well, Miles, how come you just don't use social media in order to convene people to meet down at the Calgary Public Library? Well, I'm trying to avoid that. I'm trying to actually get back to face-to-face as the original social media, which is what the Indigenous people really have taught me. And in addition, my reading and listening about social media is, to my knowledge, there's not one social media platform out there that I've heard or been tempted to use that hasn't got some sort of a grievance against it for censorship, that they will pull your event if they don't agree with it. And I think free speech is very important. This is where I agree with Jordan Peterson, the professor of psychology from the University of Toronto. I do agree free speech and not being subjected to compelled speech is important. I disagree with him when he says patriarchy is not an issue. As you know, last time we were on this, I broadcast from a spot that you've seen me before, where the statutes clearly state that women were not persons until 1929 in Canada. Women have not been persons for it's not even been 100 years. So when we think about what is the different kind of thinking, I'm just wondering, well, okay, how many kinds of different thinking do we have available to us? Well, there's the feminine brain, which has not been properly represented in decision-making. There's the indigenous wisdom that has not been properly represented in decision-making. So if anybody else has any other ideas where other kinds of thinking is possible, by all means, let me know. So your Radical Radish platform of the combination of human intelligence combining with artificial intelligence has to be one that is not going to be tampering unless you know, of course, if somebody has grounds to levy a hate communication charge, of course, you do that. We have laws in Canada against hate speech, but it's not for a platform, in my opinion, or journalism not to report the facts. So this is where I think you can definitely find an important role to play with Radish. I just will wrap up with, you know, why we just will continue the good struggle. I would just quote to Joanna Macy and Molly Brown, this book from the library. I've got 1 minute. titled Coming Back to Life. She says there's three stories to choose from. The first, or scenarios. The first scenario or story a person is free to choose is business as usual. That means just carry on with industrial growth society. Like Jamin jokingly said, well, if this isn't going to go forward, then we might as well go out chopping trees and chop trees too, while the trees are getting still good. That's business as usual. The second story that you can choose is this is the great unraveling. It's hopeless. Science has this and that to say how bad everything is, and we're going down, people. Or you can say, no, there's an opportunity for the third story, the great turning, as she describes, and that is we will do everything we can to join together to act for the sake of life on Earth. And that's what we are about. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Miles. All right. Next up in the queue is Jamin, followed by Adam, followed by Melissa. Take it away, Jamin. Don't mind if I do. All right. So I want to, again, encourage us all to think about what is it going to take, right? Step by step. What is the next step? And again, I'd really love to get some feedback. Do you all agree with me, yes or no, about that what is critically needed is a platform that brings humanity together so that we can face these issues together in a unified, extremely transparent and public way? Kind of like, is it Hyde Park where people get up on soapboxes? Okay, kind of. Corner. What's it called? Hyde Park Corner. Hyde Park Corner. So, like in London where people get up on soapboxes and just total free open air freedom of speech, kind of like that, but very well organized on the web, and you can just go to them you want and participate or just listen in. My hypothesis being that with the tools that we have, and from time to time I give kind of an overview and presentation of Radish so that people get the gist of it. But with the tools that we have, we can facilitate an amazing, groundbreaking co-creation and innovation of all the systems that we would need to develop for geoshading, for refreezing the Arctic, for cleaning up the ocean, for holistic land management, et cetera, et cetera. It's imminently achievable. And but if we don't share that as a goal, if I'm just like way out on a limb, so I'd really love to hear people say, yes, Jamin, we agree with you on this platform, or no, Jamin, you're totally wrong. We could totally accomplish this way better with fragmentation and isolation and the siloed approach, which is our current modality and has been for the last 10,000 years. Because if we can reach unanimous agreement on that, then we can talk about how we might achieve this platform. So thank you, Melissa, for chiming in there. But I'd really love, because we're running out of time. We've been doing the social club for about 1.5 years, and material progress has really not been made in any direction. Right? We're yet another fragmented group. Yes, we love each other's company and we share a lot of ideas, all well and good, but we're running out of time. We need to figure out what is our strategy to get the ball into the end zone of cooling the planet, healing the ecosystems, cleaning up the ocean, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd love to hear, just a very fundamental conversation. Yes, we need to bring humanity together and and essentially instantiate a super intelligence. The one I propose is humanity combined with artificial intelligence, through this very conversational medium, and then other media for going from ideation and generation of ideas for solutions to actually designing solutions. That's where the design phase of Radish, for example, is going to be modeled after GitHub.com, where people co-create open source software. Well, it's not too much of a leap to go from open source software to open source solutions generally. You can imagine open source CAD files, for example, where you can make modifications to 3D designs of systems, for instance, or public policy documents and proposals. anything can be open sourced. If you can articulate it in writing or in speech, it can be open sourced. So from ideation to design to modeling to implementation, but better together, right? So if y'all agree with me, let's get some resonance around there, and then let's have a conversation about how do we actually achieve that, because we're running out of time. I'm at my own 4-minute mark. We got folks in the queue. So I'm going to leave it at that. And really, I invite, I'm not here to dictate terms on what you say, talk about whatever you want, but I'm just really encouraging people to think about, given that we have this urgency, do we want to work together to convene humanity in this way? Or is there some other strategy that y'all have? If so, speak it out. All right. I'm going to stop myself, and let me just now go into Q mode. No, actually, I know Adam's next. Adam is next, followed by Melissa, followed by Dan, followed by Miles. So go ahead and take it away, Adam.
Okay, Jamin, I agree with you. We're running out of time. And Miles said that the Indians and had a plan, and there is another plan that you didn't mention, Miles, and that is the plan that I wrote, which is called the Road to Life plan, which involves the end use of money. And so today, you know, Einstein said it, you know, we have to have a different way of thinking, because the way we've been thinking hasn't worked. I mean, we've developed all these massive cities and roads, and we've covered the earth like a cancer. And this way, it doesn't work. So if we're going to have a future, if our children are going to have a future, we have to plan it for them. So we can't plan it. Our old ways didn't work. So we have to develop a new plan that's totally a paradigm shift that's designed for our children to be able to live in a future. How do we, now this is really controversial. So you can't just tell people, well, you know, you have to end money and stuff like that. What you have to do is develop a plan on the internet, on this website. That this is the way I see it. So you use RCI, you develop this collective intelligence team that works back and forth with the AI. And also, like I was saying earlier, that we don't have to use AI as much as we think we do, I think, because we have a lot of people, once people start getting into it, like I said, the teenagers, they can be the search engine. I mean, imagine, you know, a topic team putting a question out there, and all of a sudden you've got hundreds of teenagers searching the internet for that question. I mean, you know, you don't have to worry about AI learning anything or whatever. It's manpower. We've got a lot of manpower out there that we haven't even used yet. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. We're running out of time, and I've also been faced with myself with decisions about that. You know, there's references that I'd like to make that I hold back from because of crazies out there. But you know, you have to be a little bit careful on artificial intelligence and how to use that, because mankind is I mean, all about all of life on Earth, as far as we've known it, we've only had the highest form of intelligence we've ever had is mankind's. Now, some of us are, you know, if we're on a scale from 0 to 10, and 10 being your utmost geniuses like Tesla. Now we're talking about introducing a form of intelligence that's you know, magnitudes higher. the only form of intelligence that's magnitudes higher that we've ever discussed as humanity is God. So now you're going to have another form of intelligence that's higher than all of us. And you're talking in the world of God. And I don't know how the Catholic Church is going to respond to this. All I know is that we do have a large contingency of mankind that can do these searches, and that can, we just have to build it. If you build it, they will come. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Melissa's up next, followed by Dan. Take it away, Melissa.
Thank you, Jamin. Yes, Adam, I just, you reminded me of a story of a friend of mine who's a Haida fisherman who was very, 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 very brilliant designer and created a fish trap that was so efficient that he knew he couldn't market it on the colonizer market because they would not know when to stop using it. So I think that, that really underlines what you're saying about artificial intelligence is, would we have the wisdom and the will to use it always in an appropriate and beautiful, beneficial, healing way, not in a destructive way. I also wanted to bounce back to something that Miles was saying when he quoted Joanna Macy and Olive Brown about the great unraveling, that there is this natural thing of unraveling life, that when you read creation mythology, there's always creation and destruction. They go hand in hand. And so some of that is that is happening now. I think the confusing thing for all of us is that it's also partially or largely in our hands, this destruction of the planet. But I keep questioning, how much of that is creation's intention and how much of it is just and then I wanted to come back to what you said, Jamin, and it's funny because just before you spoke, I was just writing about how I've been, through my own research, discovering many individuals and groups who are doing really wonderful work. And we keep saying there aren't a lot of people out there who are awake and conscious and wanting to act, but I'm going to question that, because the more I research, the more I discover about groups and individuals who are like all of us, who do see what's happened and is happening to the earth at the hands of humans and want to make a difference and are acting to make a difference. And so there's this one thing that's going to probably be backwards for you. This is in Cleveland. It's
no, it's forward.
The Lake Erie Institute, and they have been holding seminars for the community, and it says many participants of our programs have been deeply deeply transformed their worldview and changed the direction of their lives. The programs and leadership styles and education focus on bringing forth the collective wisdom of our community in connection with the earth. So that's just one thing in Cleveland that I discovered. I'm also connecting up with a group who are focused on sustainability in Cleveland. I believe it's through the mayor's office, and they actually are working on a climate action plan. I think one thing that all of us can do, and Miles, it sounds like you're doing that, and certainly I'm interested in doing this and am doing this, is be ourselves connecting rods for now. We can reach out and create our own personal platforms right now to pull people together and start working together, looking for solutions and working together on solutions. But I agree with Jamin that we do need a platform where we can come together collectively and work on a much larger scale. But in the meantime, as individuals, we certainly can also do this work. And I think it would be even great within our own group. Maybe we create a bulletin board or a pin board or something where we can actually put our notices of different people we're working with or people we've discovered, and then start networking. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, my love. All right. Up next is Dan, followed by Miles, followed by Jamin. Take it away, Dan.
Yeah, so no, I do agree that we do need a radical collective intelligence platform. And again, my fantasy or my hope would be that it would provide a means to integrate in a rational way the solutions and the removal of constraints, which are, in a sense, well known. So from my point of view, we have an exponential situation going on. And so when we say time is running out, yes, time is definitely running out. There's signs all over the place that people are aware of. We have some of the most prominent scientific minds in the world kind of tuned in to what's happening. But we also live in a very corrupting kind of cultural environment. Adam with his ideas about money touches on one aspect of it, the very, kind of corrupt economic philosophy, the inability to control the accumulation of money and things, which in a way makes no sense at all. I mean, it's just, but we're in that. And it's a constraint. It's definitely a constraint. It just appears that, as Jamin, you pointed out, so many people have pointed out, at this point in time, we need to refreeze the Arctic. We need to pull down these greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. There's already too much up there. And we're just increasing it. It's an industrial machine which is out of control. And so those are the things that need to be done. But that means that the way of life that we have here in the United States, that we have in Europe, that we have in China, that we have in India, that we have in Russia, that we have all over the place, that means that has to be radically transformed. And it must be done in some way that allows that there's some sense of fairness and justice involved in that transformation. And that's a whole set of problems that needs to be addressed, and it would be useful to have a platform where people who perhaps have more of a interest or understanding of those issues could go to. But the practical reality is that we're just running out of time. Exponential is exponential. And most people, again, and it's been commented on and talked about, they don't really understand what that means. It's just kind of, most of us here do understand, we know what an exponential function is, but we're getting to the point where, I remember back when I was at the university, at Berkeley, when I was an undergraduate, and at that point, I forget what introductory class it was, they talk about, the pond with the lilies, and that eventually it would be 100%, covered. But on the very late, whatever was it 30 days, whatever it was, half of the pond would be covered. And then on the very next day, it's done. It's over. That's exponential change. So you can be very much deceived about how things are day to day, month to month, year to year. And then before you know it, the hurricane is on you and it's over. So so I do think that needs to be, really, really stressed. And the final thing I would just say is, and I remember, Jamin, part of what you and Jamie did, you submitted, to the vicar, that the book on, why people are in denial on climate change. I don't know if he's going to read it, probably not, but it was a good thing to put out there. And again, that is part of the problem. Okay, I'm going to let it go.
All righty. Thank you, Dan. Next up in the queue is Miles, followed by Jamin, followed by Adam. Take it away, Miles. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again. So with respect to the question about getting this platform physically established, plugged in, fired up, and running, I will comment and then ask a question, Jamin. So, as everybody knows, I'm taking this direction of seeing if Indigenous wisdom is a point of creating this new way of looking at the world. You guys are right now admirably doing an excellent job with the Roman Catholic Church. 2.some billion people. What I have here is a copy of the discussion guide for Laudato Si on care of our common home from, I believe, 2015. As I said, I'm working this Indigenous possibility, and there's a document here that I have which actually predates the Laudato Si, because it was issued in 2010. It is the World People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth of Cochabamba, Bolivia, the People's Agreement. Mostly indigenous people of the world came together in Bolivia in 2010 and created this document. So I believe what I'm looking forward to is working with First Nations of Treaty 7 on this angle. Because the Indigenous people describe as the Indigenous lady, Sherry Mitchell, Indigenous name is She Who Brings the Light, in her sacred instructions, describes the cannibal giant, this devouring monster that consumes everything in its path. And it very much reminds me of Peter Phillips' book, most recently published, called Giants, the Global Power Elite. So, Jamin, tell us about what kind of response did you get from one of the global giants, the global power elite, namely Microsoft? Why is it that Google is not leading the charge on something like this, or Apple? These are trillion-dollar capitalized global giants. Is it what's going on? Do you need, see, I don't know anything really about business, like how to move forward an initial public offering. What I will do from my end is tomorrow I'm going to an event. Somebody who's very sympathetic to the Social Club at the End of the World put me onto this at the University of Calgary, the Graduate College, and the Calgary Climate Hub. They're having a get-together. I'd love to try to do a YouTube video, a hangout for Radish. On Saturday, there's another event by this Climate Hub in Calgary, and anybody listening to me, not only tomorrow, Wednesday evening for social evening, but Sunday from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. at the Hillhurst United Church. There's going to be the Climate Hub gathering, and I'll take Radish there. Who knows, maybe I can broadcast. But again, now to close, I don't know what it takes to do a public offering, and I don't know why Google, Apple, Microsoft aren't leading the charge on something like this. So please help us with those.
All righty. Thank you, Miles. Next up is, sweetheart, thank you. Next up is Jamin, followed by Adam. So, Miles, let me first address let me get my timer going, and let me first address your question, you know, what happened at Microsoft and why aren't Google or Apple leading the charge? I'll put it in very simple terms. The entire technology sector, these big companies who dominate the sector, they are a subset of corporations, the corporate sector, the private sector. And my oversimplified view of the private sector is that they are addicted to this toxic substance called money, which Adam has written about extensively and really opened my mind to. They are, you know, akin to heroin addicts, deep into an addiction to heroin, except the specific flavor of heroin that they're into is called money. And they therefore are victims of the blindness, which is so well articulated in that book that I gave to the Vicar General last week called Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change by George Marshall. Now, in my time, I'm just going to start to speculate freely on how we might come up with such a plan, such a platform to unite the world around it. And I'll invite people to just jump in even while I'm talking. Just unmute your microphone and blurt something out if you have an idea, because I just want this to be an open brainstorm. I want, rather than a Jamin monologue, let's just experiment here a little bit, okay? So, and Adam, you're next in the queue. If I go over a bit over 5 minutes, please forgive me, because I think it's important that we try this out, okay? So just jump in if you have an idea. But, you know, so I'll start with, there are groups. We're a group, and there are bigger groups and smaller groups and individuals. So there's all kinds of groups that are around already working together. How do we, you know, go from that to one big, you know, worldwide forum? And that's not to say that we need to dismantle the forums that currently exist, but maybe how do we, you know, create a federation of forums, right? Okay, maybe that's part of the answer. Yeah, go ahead, Adam. Go ahead.
Well, you know, we have all these different groups, like you said. But what's common amongst all these groups? They are all separated. You take all the environmental groups, they're all different. I mean, they're all separated. They're not connected. That's what we need. We need a platform on the internet for everybody to get connected. That's all I want to say.
No, great point. Great point. Mm-hmm. So, you know, so the question is, you know, how do we get them to become connected? You know, Facebook might be a starting point, because most of these groups, the vast majority, have Facebook pages, and so there could be a way to, you know, connect us all via Facebook is one idea, but you know that still keeps us kind of trapped in sort of the Facebook paradigm, which is very much comment based. I mean, we're thinking very expansively about this much more conversationally and open source style co-creation. And so, and for me, you know, the platform still needs to be built. That platform doesn't exist. All the pieces exist, like, you know, Google Hangouts and YouTube videos and all that. That's a piece that exists, but the platform does not yet exist. It needs to be built. So what I'm envisioning is some sort of a movement that comes together, and with the power of the movement and the power of millions of us working together, we can, you know, muster the resources to build the platform and muster the creativity to build a platform, and then begin to actually use the platform. But how do we get humanity to come together, to be less fragmented? I remember when I was in preschool, one day, the teacher poured, like, I don't know, a quart of pure cream into this jar, and we passed it around the room, and we all shook the jar. And little by little, globules of fat, of butter, started to form together. And the next, and over time, globules started to form. So how do we shake up the cream, you guys? How do we shake up the cream and get one ball of butter? And then we got an all butter toast and we all got to eat it. And I was amazed. It was fascinating. So how do we get these little globules of fat, each globule representing, another little group or big group or whatever? How do we all come together? How do we do it?
I'd like to respond to that again.
Well, you're next in the queue, so I think I'm at 5 minutes. So I'm just going to go ahead and reset the clock and let you take it away, Adam. All right, take it away. Thanks, Adam. And after Adam, next up in the queue is Dan. And I see a couple of comments, but anyway, if you want to be in the and take it away, Adam. Thank you.
Okay, so how do we get people to come and join? Well, I don't think we can, but I think Mother Nature can. And I think she's doing that. So she's waking people up. I think our responsibility is to get the platform built so that people will have a place to go when Mother Nature wakes them up. So then everything's going to be different. And they're going to listen to Einstein, and they're going to say, well, we can't do things the same way. And, even though money sounds ridiculous to try and end, it's not about us. Our ways didn't work. So it's about our children. We need a scientific plan that will tell us what we have to do in order to provide life for our children. And how do we come up with that scientific plan? Well, we do that on this RCI platform. We use AI as much as we have to, and we use as the masses of people come to a place. I mean, as they wake up, they're going to want a place to go where they can, contribute and help build this plan. And then there'll be lots of people joining in to become the search engines. Like I said, the young people, it's their future we're building. So it doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter what our history is. It's our future that's important. So if that scientific plan requires the end use of money, and that's why I say that it does, because if you really want to make changes fast, you have to get rid of the middleman, and that is money always. I mean, you try to develop a plan that involves using money. A scientific plan that says, okay, we have to do this and this and this. We have to refreeze the Arctic. We have to take care of the global dimming problem. We have to make all these major changes. Well, we've already proved that we're not going to make these major changes because everybody is under the influence of money. I mean, it's like Google and Microsoft. All corporations and all people have to work within the confines of money. So you're not going to be able to develop a plan because it's going to be nixed on every turn. So and I've looked into it, and the way you develop a plan is scientifically, and you do it if you start looking at money as a poison to mankind, all of a sudden the doors start opening, and you can see that there is a way out, but we have to get rid of all the peripheral stuff, that's the paradigm stuff that's just in the way, and money is definitely in the way. You get rid of it overnight, we can have major changes. We can reduce our carbon footprint overnight by like 70% if we develop a system where we don't use money. And that's what the system that I've put out, detailed out in the Road to Life plan, and it's not ridiculous. So that's all in there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Next up in the queue is Dan, followed by Jamin. Take it away, Dan.
Okay, so I got a couple of things I want to throw into the mix. One big problem, again, we're living in a culture and an economic system which is really problematic. You know, it's kind of, there's a culture of psychopathy that we have had going for quite some time. Back in the United States, back in the 1950s and the 1960s, and maybe into the 70s a little bit, it wasn't quite so prevalent. It was still there, it operated, but it had not completely taken over. But it has big time ever since, you know, the big crossover point when Reagan got elected and Margaret Thatcher got elected in England. And what we're looking at is we now have human beings, some of who are adults now, you know, getting into their late 30s or, you know, their 40s, who have never known anything else on a visceral, really something they've lived through level. And what people are basically given to understand is, what my responsibility is to take care of myself, number one, and then my wonderful, wonderful family. That's it. And my decisions have got to go down that way. You know, when I used to do these mental health presentations where I'd be emphasizing certain things, you know, I'd bring up the thought experiment where, you know, think about this. If you're offered a job which is going to, or a position or something where you're going to be able to make $10 million for you and your wonderful family. And the problem is, of course, that if you come in, you have to realize that the project we're talking about is going to cause some very severe environmental problems, and it's going to cause a lot of people to lose their jobs. That's just what's going to happen. Now, do you want to come in and get the benefit of the money for you and your wonderful family? Oh, and by the way, I got to tell you, there's thousands and thousands of people lined up behind you who are perfectly happy to take that position if you don't want it. So are you in or out? And, you know, if you're really honest with yourself, when you have that final condition that, you know, there's plenty of folks just waiting in line to step in and do what we want to do, are you in or out? People will be in. It's a very severe systemic problem. And it needs, and again, it needs to be talked about. And then the other thing on a more micro, you know, in a sense, you see it all the time because we have our working lives organized into authoritarian bureaucratic structures where fundamentally people are taught that, ethics, any kind of ethical concerns you have or you may have been educated with, if it goes against the interest of the organization, you know what, you just better put it aside. Your most important ethical principle is loyalty to the company and so on. And if you deviate from it, you're going to be out of the job. And we always have somebody who's perfectly willing to step in. It's a very psychopathic setup. It's built into our culture and our structure. And it's just a very, very severe constraint. And I would say about Google and, you know, Facebook and all of these platforms, and something to consider in terms of any potential radical collective intelligence platform, is what we're seeing happen, I guess in part to the dynamic with Donald Trump, you know, this crazy, you know, fetish about this one human being, where what we are getting now is this ability of those who have the power in Google and Facebook and these high-tech companies. They are starting to impose a censorship on opinions, that deviate from the party line, something which is very similar to what happened in socialist, communist Russia, Soviet Union days. And yeah, I'll wind it up. And I think that, you know, it's necessary to understand that, you know, these individuals have figured out that Donald Trump got elected because he, you know, psychopath that he is, he had messages which resonated with the population, and they were anti-elite messages and messages that the elites had betrayed you. And this is how he got in. And we cannot have that kind of message be propagated any longer, or we're just going to have Donald Trump or more of it, etc. So I do think that, you know, it's important. You know, we have to be very reflective of who we are, what we swim in, and to have a lot of discussions about it. I'm going to go ahead and check out.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Okay, next up in the queue is Jamin, and I think I'm the only one in the queue at this point.
I saw Fred. Fred was waving his hand.
Dan, you raised. Oh, Miles, did you have something to say?
I saw Fred waving his hand.
Miles, I can't hear you.
Oh,
sweetie, you
sorry.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I had my volume up. No, go ahead, Miles.
I just said I saw Fred waving his hand, so I think he wants to get in.
Oh, Fred, you want to in the queue? Put a thumbs up if you do. Fred, you want to be in the queue, Fred? I'm just gonna put Fred in the queue. Thank you, Miles, for that. Appreciate that. Okay, and Fred, you're in the queue next. So, all right, resetting here. So, Dan, you brought up a really important point, which culture. And you know, you articulated it very well. Our current culture is founded in the notion, the idea, the imperative that I have to take care of myself and my wonderful family to the expense of everyone else and everything else if necessary. And unfortunately, it has been necessary in the game that we're playing today in the economy of hoarding and of money. So I put together 4 things together, and they form a not very appealing acronym. The 4 things are the fundamental story of humanity and the story of the world and our place in the world and all that. So story, culture, our entire set of living arrangements, and the global economy. And the non-sexy acronym is SCLE. Story, culture, living arrangements, economy. The 4 go together. They're mutually reinforcing. They kind of form a stable model of those 4 elements: story, culture, living arrangements, and economy. And I've come to the conclusion that what needs to be transformed, what needs to be created, is a whole new SCLE. We're in a current omnicidal SCLE, and we need to create a whole new SCLE. And to do that, we're going to need this massively higher form of intelligence to achieve that. That's why I have this relentless focus on how do we, you know, bring the world together into a common platform. How do we build the platform and then bring everyone to it? You know, one of the issues is, you know, if we raise that as a question or a challenge to humanity, everyone who's got a platform is going to say, oh, let's use my platform. No, let's use mine. No, mine is better. Hey, Facebook is already set up for that. We've got video conferencing. Google says, no, but we were current SCLE, you know, which is the story that each of us is separate from everyone else, and we each have to maximize our own footprint. And what we've ended up with is 7.4 billion Monty Python style footprints, or tracks of footprints, all over the garden. We've trampled the garden to death. So how do we, overcome this whole separation thing and make the jump to light speed, if you will, of a common platform, Campfire? How do we do that? I'm just grappling with it. Adam, your point is very well taken. we have to, well, you made 2 points in a few minutes ago. One is to build the platform first and then they'll come. Well, we've been building the platform on Radish. It's slow going. We're kind of under-resourced, underfunded. But your second point was we need to get rid of the middleman. We need to get money. I agree with that too. My thought is this: if we can convene a critical mass of collective intelligence and start designing the new SCLE, story called autonomy, that can be so inspiring that it'll inspire other people to join the co-creative effort. And in that design, I think it's obvious that money will have to either be jettisoned completely or transform into some new form of currency that leads the individual and society in the direction of healing rather than hoarding and destroying. 4-minute mark. Currency is appeal to follow them into A, building the platform, B, using it to collectively design the new SCLE. Once the new SCLE is designed, we then need to design a transition path from the current SCLE to the new SCLE, right? And these are phenomenally complex undertakings. I point to the outstanding documentary Unlocking the Mystery of Life, which basically nets out with a whole bunch of scientists concluding that life itself and the molecular machinery inside of every single living cell had to be designed. There's no way that stuff could have evolved from a chemical soup just by chance. And likewise, I'm suggesting that the new SCLE that we need to design and then transition to will have to be intelligently designed. And the greater the intelligence, the better, because we've got tremendous urgency to get this done. All righty, I'm at 5 minutes. Next. Now, can anyone hear me? People are looking kind of frozen. Sweetie, can you hear me on there? Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, Fred, take it away, Fred. You're up.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. I had a knee replacement surgery a few weeks ago, and I just feel compelled to explain why I look like something the cat dragged in. Anyway, my sense of what we've been talking about and hearing is the urgency issue. Is how do we make that real for the world? I mean, it is urgent. Urgent means urgent. And I was feeling that the way to do it, I mean, it's great that we've approached the Catholic Church. I think that's great. But what about the other religions? What about the other religious leaders? Because, I mean, what is the one issue that on a global scale everyone has to grapple with? And that's, I guess, the fate of their mortal soul, or whatever religions, ultimately deal with. So, I mean, how do we convene people who have spiritual authority? I mean, what other issue is more universal than that? So, who are the and convening a group of well-respected, well-known spiritual leaders and secular humanists, because it's not just a religious issue or a spiritual issue. It's for a lot of people who don't believe in that so much. It's still very real. Anyway, I mean, I have to say that I felt overwhelmed today by the questions of, you know, the exponential rate at which this is going, and urgency, and, you know, as things devolve, the questions or the solutions are going to change, because the conditions that have to be addressed are going to change along with that. And I think that, I mean, it's great to think about long-term solutions, but isn't this one instance where we really have to think in the short term as well? Because if any of your predictions are accurate, we don't have that kind of time. And it's like the example of the oil tanker that takes 5 miles to slow down once it hits the brakes. It's like, you know, and all of these things that have to be turned around. Like, Adam, I love the idea of doing away with money, because I think money is the arch enemy of good change. But I just don't see how that can be implemented in a way that, you know, works in the time frame we have to work with. And like I said, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by the complexity of the issue and yeah. So anyway, that's all I have to say right now, and it's good to be back and hear what you guys have been thinking about. But I agree with Jamin. We gotta move on to the next step beyond talking about it. But, you know, what do people think about the idea of identifying the spiritual leaders who we get to them and say, look, it's time to stop fucking around. It's real. You guys have power. You guys need to make sure that your whatever you call it, get the message. And it can't just be what they do on Sunday. It has to be every day now. And so anyway, I'll leave it at that. Done.
Great. Thank you so much, Fred. Excellent points. Really great to have you back as well, brother. All right. Next up in the queue is Miles, followed by Dan, followed by Jamin, followed by Adam. Take it away, Miles.
Yeah. Thank you, Fred. You know, talking about the emergency. Okay. So I got my briefcase to make people aware there's an emergency with flashing lights. I didn't point out that I have, you know, just like the Marine that follows your president around, he's got it handcuffed to his wrist, right? So I've got toy handcuffs on this thing too. So yeah, we got to make people aware that there's an emergency, and you know, this is the connection with what Einstein was talking about back in 1946, atomic education urged, because it's all one big parcel. And to Fred's point about the spiritual leaders, do not forget that the indigenous people are great spiritual leaders as well. And we have the People's Conference of Indigenous Peoples in 2010 in Bolivia to pursue as well. And the one thing I want to bring to everyone's attention is, so Adam, your work is very important. What I would suggest is that you do as I did, and that you offer it to your local indigenous spiritual leaders in accordance with what's called the two-row wampum. And this was signed, this was a belt of beads from 1613 presented by the indigenous people at present-day Manhattan, New York, to the Dutch. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but Google Oren Lyons, Faith Keeper of the Haudenosaunee, and listen to him talk about the two-row wampum and this river of life. It is very deep in spiritual meaning. And this is where I would encourage you to reach out to offer this in accordance with the natural laws and of these indigenous people all across Great Turtle Island, and do it in the spirit of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, requesting in an honorable way getting their free, prior, and informed consent. And what that means, that is the cornerstone of a good relationship, free, prior, and informed consent. There's been over a century of alienation of their treaty rights to the point that almost no treaty rights will exist if things keep continuing. So what that means, very briefly, is, and everybody can do this with whatever idea you have, recognize that you're a treaty person as well. Give notice to your Indigenous hosts, disclose your information, give them time to respond, discuss the issues raised, address concerns that are part of whatever it is you're proposing. Talk about participation funding. You know, some of these Indigenous people, they're just waiting for us to show up on their doorstep and tell them, hey, we've finally awoken. And develop the process, make sure it's co-developed with the Indigenous people of your area, and accommodate, learn about their treaty rights, and work collaboratively. So just wanted to bring that to the table.
Great stuff, Miles. Thank you. Next up is Dan, followed by Jamin, followed by Adam. Take it away, Dan.
Yeah, so kind of following up on the problem with psychopathy, etc. You know, we have a system, whether it's in a corporate hierarchy or just a wealth hierarchy, where, you know, to use the cliche, you know, that you hear a lot, you know, money talks, bullshit walks. And the problem, as we're, you know, emphasizing in different ways, that is a problem. And I think that, you know, if you're a leader, you know, and again, the cliche, you know, lead or get out of the way. You know, we have leaders who are profoundly ignorant. They're either profoundly ignorant or they are intentionally deceptive for various reasons which are out there. But if you're ignorant and you're a leader, that, you know, whether you're the Pope, who does seem to be a religious leader who is not ignorant about the realities of climate, but we have religious leaders all over the place who are totally ignorant about these things. Again, I go back to the problem with the politicians. Most politicians today, you know, we used to, in Chicago, we were very familiar with psychopathic politicians, our aldermen, basically corrupt. How many Illinois governors have gone to prison? It's a joke. You know, but back in those days, you know, in the 60s, 70s, you know, et cetera, 80, you know, you'd say at least on the federal level, we don't have aldermen. But now we do. These people who are the senators and the Congress, the House of Representatives, these are people who function in that way now. They tend to be ignorant. They get a legal education, and a legal education to some degree is an education in how to be a psychopath. And again, you either play the game or, you know, get on, step aside, because there's plenty of people who will be happy to do it. And they get into these political positions. They're ignorant. They're psychopathic. And that includes today It's not just Donald Trump and some of the Republicans. It's also on the Democratic side. It is just filled with them. And the problem is, if this continues, and we also have these corporations, again, like Facebook, Google, etc., who fundamentally have put themselves at service, whether they are coerced into it or it's just the way they are, where they seem to feel what their goal is in life is to impose a rather absolute censorship on the country. And, you know, a kind of China style, where they do have pretty strong, you know, strong censorship that's there. And so this is a real practical problem. And you know, in my mind, you know, in a better world, we would not allow a politician who has, you know, they happen to be a lawyer. Okay, you're a lawyer, but what else do you know? Do you know anything about the issues that are important in the world? And if you don't, why should you represent anybody? And by the way, if we can see quite obviously that the money that you get to help yourself and your wonderful family comes directly from the corporate interest, which it almost always does, well, then we can kind of figure, if you're the normal kind of psychopath, what you're going to do is you're going to be very, very careful that you don't cross up the corporate people and anybody else in the, you know, intelligence community, et cetera, the military, whoever, that basically wants things to go a certain way. And I do think the censorship problem is huge right now. And again, I can see, you know, if we have a platform that really is good and useful, you know, it probably wouldn't take long for that to be censored very, very quickly. You know, who are you to question anybody? I'm going to go ahead. I'm done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dan. All right. Next up in the queue is Jamin, followed by Adam. So listening to you all, what's coming to me is that perhaps the master stroke here is that a meme enveloped the globe. The meme would go like this. The world is calling upon all of its religious and spiritual leaders to come together and do three things, very notably in the absence of leadership on the part of governments, to Dan's points, and to the private sector, to points made earlier about their addiction to hoarding, addiction to money, that the folks, the leaders who are furthest removed from those addictions, and government leaders are right in the middle because it's basically a license to hoard and to manipulate, ultimately for your own power accumulation, scratching the backs of the hoarders who contribute to your campaigns, etc. So in the absence of any other form of leadership, we're looking to the religious and spiritual leaders to do three things. Number one, come together and achieve a degree of unity amongst yourselves as religious and spiritual leaders about the urgency of the situation and a plan to save life. Number two, communicate to the world as a united body of religious and spiritual leaders the urgency of the problem and the urgency of all of us coming up with a solution according to the plan. Number three, so what's the plan? Build the platform to bring us all together to co-create solutions and invite the world to join in an extremely public PR, media, social media, world tour, break out the Pope mobile and whatever the equivalent mobile is for, the other religions, and invite the world to join. So that the world is calling upon its religious and spiritual leaders to step up and lead in precisely this way, right? I could say more about that, but I think you all get the gist. If you have any questions, ask me. I'm going to turn it over to who's next, and who's next is Adam. Take it away, Adam. Thank you.
Okay, well, one of the things I write an analogy beginning of the Road to Life plan, and it's called the Starship Enterprise. And what happens is the Starship Enterprise is all of a sudden one day people start selling pieces of the ship for money. And it's like a disease that takes over the ship. And pretty soon the patrons that are riding aboard the ship and the crew and even the captain are into this, wrapped up into this this deal where they're selling they're tearing apart the ship and selling it. And the ship's about ready to disintegrate. And all of a sudden a technician goes down into the galley and looks around and finds out that the ship has been poisoned, that the food supply has been poisoned. So he goes back to the captain and he tells the captain that the captain orders the decontamination of the food supply, and pretty soon people start coming out of it. Well, how are they going to fix the problem now? Well, they're not going to fix it by continuing the same solutions. They're not going to continue selling the ship for money. The captain's going to order it. So there is a way. I mean, there are other ways. It doesn't involve money as far as, fixing the ship. They're gonna go back to their standard operating procedures. They're going to scientifically figure out how to correct the problem and fix the ship because their mind's cleared up. And people keep saying that, it's the elite or it's these people that are, it's not. It's all of us. Money, it acts like a poison. It clouds our minds. It causes us to think in irrational ways. Otherwise, why would the oil companies, why would they stop or get in the way of mankind? Why would mankind, take that job for $10 million? And because somebody else will, well, money sets up this kind of a dialogue. These are symptoms. And,
Adam, can I